Hello. When people think of watercolor, oftentimes they think of landscapes, sunsets, beach scenes, and that stuff is all really cool, and I do demos and teach a lot of that too. But I want to show people in this new series that watercolor doesn't have to just be contained to nature images, and it doesn't have to be all muted pastel colors. You can really do a lot more with watercolor than people realize. And I have been drawn to watercolor art for a long time. I oftentimes combine it with ink to get different effects, but for these first couple demos, I want to keep it beginner level, keep it simplified, and show you how to just make some really cool, surreal, weird stuff with watercolor paints that you don't see all the time. I love owls, but today we are going to make a very different type of owl, a lot more whimsical and colorful, and combine it with some fun tree imagery and eyeballs, if that's your thing. You can really make whatever you want growing out of the tree, but I'm going to put some eyes in there. So what you're going to need is just a variety of color watercolor paints and some different size brushes. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some water to my black to get it really grayed down so it's super pastel, and then using my fine detail brush I'm going to start outlining my basic shapes. You could also do this with a pencil, but I'm using the paint simply because on video it shows up better. So I have this circular form first with some jagged edges underneath. I've left the top open, and then I'm adding this sort of teardrop shape near the bottom. Two big round circles for the eyes, a diamond shape for the beak, and then right underneath that oval I'm adding a flowing branch shape that the owl is sitting on. Really make this your own. If you're trying this out, you can make it any shape you want. I'm adding some curved lines for the tree that's going to be growing out of the top of the owl's head, and I'm starting on the outside edges of the tree first, and then adding a branch going up the middle, and from there I'm just adding little curved lines coming out until the space is filled in how I want. So as long as you have your three-pronged, two sides and then the middle as the foundation, it's really easy to make a tree shape. Now I'm making some little almond shapes that could very well be leaves, but today they're going to be eyes. And this just gives us a nice foundation, so when we're filling in, especially the background, we don't cover over areas that we want to keep open for other colors. With watercolor, any color you put down, it's still going to show through even when you put something else over it, because watercolors are transparent. So oftentimes you do need to block out areas that you don't want, for example, the background color to wash into. And now I'm going ahead and grabbing a medium-sized round brush, and I'm going to start the background. So I've made a wash, which is just where you add a lot of water to the color you're using so that it's lighter and it really flows across the paper. And when you really water it down, you can get some really nice blending and bleeding of different colors together. And that's all we're going to do with the background, is just add a bunch of different colors and let them bleed and flow together to make a cool abstract design for the sky. So I'm starting with this blue, and then I'm going to add the magenta next and really just let it flow and bleed right into it. And as you're going, you can add areas that are darker and lighter based on how much water you put in. So like I had a lot of water for my magenta down there that meets the blue, but a little bit less as I get further up and I really want to get that bold hot pink color. And when you get into those little nooks and crannies in between your tree branches, you want to go ahead and use the very tip of your brush. And if you just use the tip, barely touching the paper, kind of holding it at a 90-degree angle to your surface, you can get really thin, fine areas. I added some lime green also, bleeding into the pink, and now we're going to go ahead and do the other side. I did one side at a time because it bleeds better when your paint is really wet, when you've just laid it down. I didn't want too much time to go by where the bottom color, like the blue, dried before I was able to add my pink and my green. And now I want to add some shadow. So I'm going in with some of the black watered down to a gray. I'm doing some areas lighter and some darker, and I'm just laying down little swirls and squiggles of this black throughout, especially concentrated on the bottom and around the actual owl to make it stand out with my same medium-sized round brush. And then I'm taking some water and I'm just blending out that color so there's more of a gradual transition between this black I'm adding over and the background. You don't want to see any just harsh black lines on there. It gives a kind of a wispy night sky foggy effect. And now I'm going ahead and laying down all my base layers. So I'm going with the watered down black to a very light gray on this branch. I'm using a flat brush now because the branch is more of a rectangular shape, so it's going to get a lot more even coverage using that flat brush. I'm going ahead with a smaller flat brush to do the same thing on these thinner branches up top. Generally, round brushes are for rounded forms or things where you want a lot of texture, and flat brushes are for flat, straight-edged objects or things that you want to cover really smoothly. So now, because we want a feathery look on our owl, I'm filling in the base color of him or her with a round brush. And I'm just drawing some of that blue color I've chosen up into the bottom of the tree as well, kind of streaking it in there. And I'm not worrying a lot about creating texture or patterns right now. This is just the base color. With watercolor, you do a lot of layering. And watercolor dries pretty quick, so it's already dry enough on the head for me to go ahead and add the facial features and add the base colors for those without the two colors bleeding together. But with watercolor, if two colors touching each other are wet, they will run together. So you want to make sure, if you don't want that to happen, that the two areas that are going to touch are both dry. You can hurry it along with a blow dryer if you want. So now I've mixed an orange because I don't have an orange paint, and I've put that in the beak and the little talons, and I'm also using that color on the top and bottom of my eyes with the detail brush. Next, I'm grabbing my medium-sized round brush again, and I'm filling in the area on the belly in this bright green to kind of bring that in from the top. Now for the fun part, adding some details and patterns. So I'm using the tip of my flat brush to add some stripes. And you can get really thin, even lines if you use the tip of your brush, holding it at kind of a 90-degree angle again from the paper. But if you press it down on its side and tilt it and add a little more pressure, then you can get a thicker line. So you can really make your lines kind of go from thick to thin and kind of ribbon around the tree branch. And now I'm going to use my smaller flat brush and do the same thing on the branches coming out of the owl's head. And you can also see, depending how you use your brush, you can get thicker and thinner lines if you're using the wide side of the tip of the brush or if you're turning it on its thinner side. And now I'm going ahead with a darker blue, and I'm adding some texture for the feathers on the wings. So I'm just making little short streaks with the tip of my brush to get those jagged triangular ends. And then I'm just tapping up and down with the brush, kind of tilting it at an angle a little bit to get the long rounded streaks all over the wings that are going to imply our feathers. Now I'm going ahead with the detail brush, and with that same color, I'm just outlining the bottom of the head and making some little streaks to add some texture to that part and kind of differentiate it from the rest of the body. And again, just tapping with that little detail brush, the same technique, but with a smaller brush. I'm making some little V-shaped streaks right above the eyes, and then streaking some of that darker blue into the other areas of the tree, just to really make it look like it's growing out of the owl and to add some continuity. And now I'm adding some detail to the eyes, so still with the detail brush, I'm adding a ring of magenta on the bottom and some little stripes coming out. They could be eyelashes or some other pattern. And then I'm adding some green to the top. And remember, as you're watching me do this, if you try this yourself at home, which I hope you do, this is something that is really just experimental and fun and whimsical and freeform, so you can really add whatever patterns and colors you want. So you don't have to do it just like this. You can really decorate your owl however you want to and make it your own. If you do try this, it'd be really awesome if you sent me a picture. I'd love to see what you came up with. And now I'm using my detail brush to add just some scalloped feather shapes. This kind of repeating pattern where the feathers below go in between each of the feathers in the above row. Pretty simple pattern. And just to finish it off, I'm just adding a little streak down the center of each one. Just a really light, quick stroke. Again, with my detail brush. You can do some really nice outlining if you have a thin enough brush. Now that we have our little owl friend looking good, I'm going to finish up the eyes. So I decided to use a bright blue to kind of match the owl, and so I'm just adding a little circle with my medium round brush inside each of our eyes that we have up here. And now while I'm waiting for that to dry, I see that the owl is kind of blending into the background a little bit. I want to make it a little more defined, so I'm putting another layer of watered down black just around the base of the owl, especially in the area where the background behind it has a lot of blue. And that really is enough time for the circles in the eyes to dry if you haven't used a ton of water. So I'm going ahead now with the detail brush again, and I'm just outlining the top of the eyelid and putting a little dot inside each of them for the iris. And that's it, you're finished. I hope you try this. It's a lot of fun. You can surprise yourself with maybe picking something different to grow out of the owl's head, use some different patterns. make something different growing out of the tree. You can really get wacky and creative with this, so I hope you try it and get creative. It's a really relaxing and fun thing to do, especially after a long day at work. And definitely go ahead and send me a picture if you like what you came up with, or even if you don't like it that much. I'd love to see what you worked on. Thank you. And feel free to subscribe if you want to see more demos. I'm definitely planning on doing more weird watercolor stuff coming up, so stay tuned.